Hey guys, this is Jarbo Gaming back with some more coverage of the legendary series Ace Combat. Today, we're going to be dancing with the angels in the skies of Strange Real as we check out Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation. Released for the Xbox 360 in 2007. Wait, did I just say Xbox?
Go dance with the angels!
Indeed I did. For some godforsaken reason, Ace Combat 6 was launched as and remained an Xbox exclusive. It was never released for any PlayStation console. In an interview, one of the producers stated the choice to make the game exclusive was made after research on new hardware and because it was believed that fans had been kept waiting for a long time and to satisfy demand for online play. To me, it seems like there may have been some other factors that determined this, but regardless, that exclusivity was certainly the determining factor in why the game ended up being the lowest selling game in the franchise, selling just 700,000 copies. Honestly, that shouldn't have been a surprise since nearly all previous Ace Combat games have been PlayStation exclusive, and I think it's safe to say the majority of the game's fan base at the time owned Sony game consoles. The jump to the next generation console did provide a significant leap forward, at least when it came to in-engine gameplay. More enemies could now be on screen, creating battles that were more action-packed than ever, and visual fidelity was certainly improved. Although the cutscenes prior to each mission did leave a little bit to be desired due to the nature of their in-engine rendering. Personally, I preferred the look of Ace Combat 5's pre-rendered cutscenes. The one thing that stood out to me most about the game, from a technical standpoint at least, was the frame rate. Coming from the PS2's Holy Trinity that all ran at 60 FPS to Fires of Liberation running at 30 took some major adjustment. Now, I was actually emulating this game using Xenia. Don't worry, I do own my own physical copy of the game, but anyway, I had the option of running the game at 60 FPS. I wanted to stay true to the original feel of gameplay though, and since running the game at a higher frame rate slightly changes some aspects of gameplay, I decided against it. But I'll tell you, playing through this game at 30 frames per second really made me marvel at just how incredible it was to be able to experience the PlayStation 2's Ace Combat games at 60 FPS. I don't know what sort of black magic they had to do to make that possible, but props to them. I certainly would have preferred less visual fidelity to maintain that higher frame rate, as the result is an overall less enjoyable gameplay experience in my opinion. Sure, by the end of my playthrough, I adjusted to the lower frame rates just fine, but being locked at 60 FPS would have really made the gameplay of Fires of Liberation shine even brighter. But moving on from the technical changes that came from bringing Ace Combat to the next generation of consoles, how is Ace Combat 6? Is it a good entry in the series? Does it surpass previous games? To answer the first question, yes. It's a good game and 100% worth playing through. The second question though, I'm not sure if this is polarizing or not, but I wouldn't rank it above 4, 5, or 0. Why is that though? Especially considering the fact that the gameplay is honestly pretty great. Well, I think story is the largest factor, particularly the parallel side stories that take place as you progress through the campaign. Now, there may be some of you out there who have a ton of nostalgia associated with these, but aside from that nostalgia, I can't think of a reason why anyone would consider them to be anything more than just average overall. I mean seriously, some parts of it are just cringeworthy.
Tosha! Come now, Tosha. You better learn more control than that if you want to impress your sweetheart. Terrible, I tell ya.
At least I have a sweetheart to speak of, sir.
I could have any woman I want if I made the effort.
I can't argue with him there. If he was serious enough, and I was a woman, I would probably fall for him myself.
The overall setting of the story, though, is not necessarily bad. The game takes place 5 years after the events of Ace Combat 5 in the year 2015 and features a conflict known as the Ameria-Estevakia War. Prior to the events of the game, the Ulysses Impact event occurs. The asteroid known as Ulysses splits up into thousands of fragments on its approach to Strange Real and rains down across the planet. Some areas of the planet, particularly Estevakia, are devastated. The weeks after saw civil war begin in the country after the collapse of their infrastructure. The fighting lasted for years before a military faction known as the Generals rose to power and seemed to bring order to the shattered nation. The militarized government invades Ameria, which ultimately is where we find ourselves, taking on the role of Talisman, leader of Garuda Team, an Amerian fighter squadron based out of Grace Maria, the country's capital. Together, with your wingman Shamrock, Garuda Team works to take it to the Estevakians and push back against the assault across a total of 15 story missions. That may seem like a small number, and to be fair, the game is on the shorter side, but those missions are much longer than your typical Ace Combat missions, with nearly all of them having multiple objectives to complete and tons of enemies. These longer missions even feature checkpoints. That's right, I said it, checkpoints in an Ace Combat game. It's a good thing too, because playing through some of these missions without checkpoints would have artificially increased the length of the game quite substantially, especially on higher difficulties, but we'll talk about gameplay more in a bit. As you progress through the campaign, you see cutscenes from different characters' perspectives prior to each mission. I personally feel like they tried to cover a bit too much here and would have benefited from focusing more on just 1 to 2 perspectives. The most noteworthy characters followed are Melissa Herman, a woman whose husband is a fighter pilot in the Amerian Air Force and who loses her daughter when the Estevakians attack her hometown, Grace Maria. She's forced to flee the city after all but giving up hope that her daughter is alive. Ludmila Tostaya, an Estevakian woman who meets and befriends Melissa early in the story, she's in search of her also fighter pilot husband, Tosha Miasik, a member of Strigan team. Colonel Viktor Wojciech, former head of the Estevakian Ace team known as Strigan, he's shot down during the initial invasion of Grace Maria, injured, and forced to become an intelligence officer after losing his wings. He experiences the plight of the Amerian people firsthand and has a transformative journey as the game progresses. Marcus Lampert, otherwise known as your wingman, Shamrock, also appears in some of these cutscenes, as well as the new leader of Strigan Squadron, Pasternak. Oh, and let's not forget Louis McKnight, an Amerian tank commander who, with the help of his ex-criminal crew member, plans to rob a bank vault before the Estevakians can? Yeah, that one I feel like we could have done without. None of these stories really grabbed me the way previous entries in the series did. I won't get into much detail, but some parts were just very predictable and sort of cliche. I wasn't a huge fan of the writing and personally didn't feel like the stories paid off in the end. While this was definitely the weakest part of the game, I think the overall conflict that's happening and unfolding as you play through missions makes up for it. The gameplay definitely carries here. Screeching across the skies in your aircraft of choice just feels right. It definitely feels like an Ace Combat game should. Speaking of aircraft, the game only features 15 playable ones, the lowest count in any of the numbered Ace Combat games. That's sort of made up for though by the fact that aircraft have multiple special weapons to choose from, with some even featuring 4 choices now. The aircraft count isn't really a huge deal, and most of your favorites are still available, although sadly, the MiG-29 isn't included, which is one of my favorites. There are also multiple skins to choose from for the available aircraft, and they can be more than just a visual change. Liveries or variants for multiple past entries in the series are included that can drastically alter the performance of aircraft. The majority of these were DLC, but they're pretty cool nonetheless. Razgrees, Mobius, Yellow Squadron, and more are included, plus anime girls, because having anime girls on the side of your Su-33 definitely makes it more effective in combat, right? Yeah, not sure how I feel about that. Back to gameplay though. Shooting down enemies feels good, especially when it comes to using your guns. They seem to get a serious buff, downing enemies much quicker compared to earlier entries in the series. Earlier, we mentioned how the new generation of hardware allowed more enemies to be on screen. It's very apparent while playing. Never before have so many land, sea, and air targets been present. It's not just for show either. All those enemies will actively engage you, and I'm not sure if it was because I was playing on the hard difficulty or not, but they're very aggressive. Aircraft will pursue you, firing missile after missile and attempting to strafe you with guns, and SAMs will absolutely ruin your day from the ground too. Altogether, this creates a battlefield experience that is very immersive with tons of actions to keep your neurons firing. I would say the difficulty, even on just the default hard setting, was substantially more challenging than expected. I probably died more times in my playthrough on hard than any previous playthrough of an Ace Combat game. Some parts were just insane, throwing a crazy amount of aircraft at you. And Pasternak, oh man Pasternak. The showdown with the Ace was particularly challenging due to how many enemies he had supporting him, and absolutely required me to use one of the new features of the game, the ability to call in a massive allied air assault. As you play through missions, there's a gauge in the bottom left corner that fills up underneath your standard attack or cover wingman commands. When the meter is full, you can hold the D-pad either up or down to call in a massive allied strike to enemies in front of you, or have your allies cover you, attacking those who are engaging you. They aren't lollygagging around either. The attacks are incredibly effective, allowing you to cleanse large portions of your screen of enemies. This new feature sort of balances out the much larger offering of enemies and is an incredibly effective tool when used properly. While we're talking wingmen, I'm happy to report that Fires of Liberation allows you to choose what aircraft, livery, and special weapons Shamrock brings with him into battle. You can relive the glory days of Ace Combat Zero while your F-15s cosplay as Cypher and Pixie. Pretty cool. Another new feature offered is the high G turn mechanic. At any time during gameplay, you can elect to trade speed for maneuverability by holding down the bumpers and pulling back on the stick. You're greeted by some glorious vapor trails as your turn radius shrinks drastically compared to a standard roll and turn. There's a drawback though, as doing this slows you down quickly, putting you at risk of a stall. You don't want to be slow and unable to dodge when missiles are closing in, so be careful. Another new offering that I honestly didn't know I needed until I played 6 was the ability to capture and land at airfields mid-mission, allowing you to repair and rearm without crossing the map's return line. There are a couple of times in the campaign where an airfield is captured like this during sortie, and it was a welcome addition. Of course, an Ace Combat game wouldn't be complete without the enemy having some surprise super weapons that need to be taken out. Perhaps with the need to fly inside some sort of internal structure? Yep, I'm sure you know the formula at this point. Here, those weapons take the form of a giant flying battlecruiser fleet and a railgun designed to shoot down asteroid fragments. I won't spoil too much, but the challenge level feels right around where it should be for them, although completing their missions is perhaps slightly more challenging than previous entries in the series just due to how many enemies there are on screen. Overall, I had a really good time with Ace Combat 6. Sure, the story maybe isn't the best, but the gameplay definitely makes up for this. This is probably the Ace Combat game I hear talked about the least, perhaps due to its exclusivity to Xbox, which I feel really deterred it from growing to its full potential. This one was so close to being absolutely incredible. If the story were tweaked a bit and it ran at a silky smooth FPS, this would be a serious contender for a top 3 Ace Combat game, but I think because of those things, it falls short of the PlayStation 2 titles. Its gameplay carries it hard, but it can only carry it so far, and the story definitely holds it back. What do you think? Did you ever get the chance to play Ace Combat 6? Am I being too hard on its story, or did you also find it a little lackluster? Let me know down below. This is Jarbo Gaming. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.